The retail sales figures are devilishly difficult to predict. They do tend to get revised quite a lot. So although the numbers were markedly worse than the city was anticipating, as I say, they are very, very hard to call and very, very prone to revision. The one certainty that we did have over September figures was that obviously we had an extra bank holiday because of the late Queen's funeral, and so spending would have taken a hit anyway. But it's really, really interesting when you look at the components involved in spending. Food sales volumes down 3.2% on where they were going into the pandemic. So people are buying less foodstuffs. That reflects inflationary pressures, I think. You're certainly seeing it in motor fuel sales, which were down by more than 1% month on month. That is obviously a reflection of higher costs of petrol and diesel. And then, interestingly, you had a big drop-off in non-store sales, the bulk of which, that includes street markets, but predominantly it is accounted for by online shopping. And so there's an interesting conclusion to be drawn there, that online sales do appear to be under an element of pressure as well. And that was actually borne out by something that we heard yesterday from ASOS, one of the big online fashion retailers. They produced some pretty disappointing numbers yesterday. So, yeah, clearly consumers' disposable incomes are under great pressure. It's clear that the Bank of England's interest rate rises are starting to have an impact, and that is, of course, why retail sales are falling. Now, on the public sector finances, well, these were markedly worse than expected as well, as you say. And chiefly, it is down to the fact that government borrowing costs have risen. Borrowing costs alone, £7.7 billion during the month of September. The government has borrowed in the financial year to date £133 billion. That's up from the Office of Budget Responsibilities forecast, which is 127 billion. That's where they thought we would be at this point in the year. And that is largely down to inflation, because around a quarter of the national debt, some 28% of it, interest payments are linked to the rate of inflation. And accordingly, with inflation rising sharply, so too have interest payments on that component of the national debt. So that's why you're seeing this big increase in interest payments. As I say, £7.7 billion for September, up £2.2 billion on the same month last year. And it's actually the biggest year-on-year. It's the first time we've had a year-on-year increase in government borrowing since March 2021. That really does point to the challenge that the new Prime Minister and the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, face when in terms of publishing this medium-term fiscal plan, which at the moment is due on the 31st of October. There are one or two people suggesting that might have to slip in order for the new Prime Minister to get their hands on the books and have a look at Mr Hunt's projections and see what they want to do. But that would really have come with a risk, because the focus right now in the markets is on the need for stability. I've been talking to the economist Gerard Lyons earlier on today. Here's what he told me.
Debt to GDP in the UK is high, but it's manageable. But what happens when debt to GDP is high? It makes the fiscal outlook very dependent on your assumptions about growth and also on the outlook for interest rates. I think the scale of tightening we're now seeing might be overdoing it. But there's no doubt that we've got to a situation where stability has taken centre stage. And that's unfortunately, in some people's eyes, taking too much of a centre stage. But as someone looking at it from the market's perspective, I'm saying, well, stability has to now be the issue that's addressed.
Now, I should probably tell you, Kimberly, what's been going on the markets in reaction to all of this. Sterling has fallen again against the US dollar. It's off by just over 1% right now against the US dollar. It's off by slightly less against the euro. Now, that is not only a reflection of the data that we've had out today. I think it's still markets taking in what we heard yesterday from Ben Broadbent. He's the Deputy Governor at the Bank of England, and he made a speech yesterday in which he indicated that were interest rates to peak at 5.25%, which is where the market has been pricing it, he said that would clip some 5% from GDP over the course of the rate tightening cycle. And he went on to say, and this is a really, really crucial intervention from Ben Broadbent, he said that the market was perhaps pricing in a higher peak for bank rate than it ought to be. And accordingly, you've seen sterling selling off accordingly. People think that the peak interest rate rises will now not be as high as the market has been pricing. And that's a factor there. Also worth pointing out that the gilt market has been showing a few signs of distress this morning. Now, obviously, gilt yields have come down very, very sharply since Kwasi Kwarteng was sacked a week ago and most of his mini budget torn up. Gilt yields, which are implied government borrowing costs, they've been going in the right direction so far this week, but we've seen a slight blip higher in yields this morning, and that is something that, again, the new Chancellor will be keeping a close tab on. Worth pointing out, though, that UK gilt yields are now yielding less. They're lower than their US Treasury counterparts. And that is really quite an interesting development because they were at very elevated levels, even compared with US Treasury yields just a couple of weeks ago.
OK, Ian, thanks a lot.